They called him immortal. But the truth was older and sharper. A vampire king, chained beneath High Talmar for 100 long years. Silver shackles bit his wrists, iron rings sealed his hunger, and every season the castle fed him offerings so his thirst would not rise and scour the land. His name was Valen, last of the Blood Kings, cursed and crowned in one breath, waiting in darkness where law and terror had bound him. The air in the great hall carried the scent of iron and wet stone, of candles burning down to collars, and the faint sweetness of yeast drifting from the kitchens, where a last batch of loaves baked for the night patrol. Wind rattled the arrow slits and set the tapestries breathing. Men in chain shirts lined the walls like dull gleaming ribs. Beneath the banners of the old kings, sunbursts stitched over darker stains, the people of High Talmar assembled, and watched two women stand upon a step of black marble. One woman they knew by name, though none dared speak it too loudly. Brinna, the miller's daughter, whose hair fell like poured gold, and whose laugh had made half the garrison foolish. She wore a new gown of blue silk that caught the lamplight, and cast it back in flakes, as if she had been dipped in a river, the color of dusk. Every glance touched her, and returned with proof. Beauty as coin, beauty as argument. The other woman wore coarse grey wool, its sleeves mended with uneven stitches. Her hair had been cut blunt to the nape for easier scrubbing. A scald mark traced an old crescent along her wrist. The head housekeeper had called her Mouse so often that many didn't know her given name. She kept her hands folded so the old milk scars didn't show. Mara stood with her chin level, eyes lowered, feeling that scent of yeast as if it were a thread tugging her towards some remembered kindness. She could feel the watching, the old sums being done on her body. Two choices laid on the marble. One desired, one overlooked. The seneschal of High Talmar lifted his staff. "By the old law," he said, voice carrying to the furthest rung of the gallery, "and by the necessity of the land, we present an offering to the bound king below, that we may have one more year of peace." Murmurs travelled like mice along the walls. Offering was the word they used now. It sounded cleaner than sacrifice, lighter than consort. The law dated back 100 years, to the night blood washed the stair, and a storm cracked the east tower. Since then, the Immortal King had been kept beneath the castle, chained in a chamber of saltstone and silver rings. He was both relic and threat, history and weapon. His hunger sealed treaties. His rest kept winter from entering the wheat. The bells of the north gate clanged once, twice, a cold mark in the air. Mara kept her face composed. She had been told, by the housekeeper, by her own bones, to stand and be usefully plain, to let the eye slide off her. But her heart beat against her stay, like a caught bird. The law said the offering must be chosen. The law said the offering must be willing. The law said nothing about love. The seneschal's staff struck the stone. A dull, resonant note. "Brinna of the mill," he said, and the blue gown flashed with the breath she let out, and boys smiled as if the sun had decided something for them. Then, after a fraction of a beat, the seneschal turned his gaze to Mara, or Mara of the lower kitchens. And there it was, the public presentation. Desired and overlooked. Two paths. The choice dressed up as ceremony, but still a choice. Mara raised her eyes finally. The hall went quiet, then refilled with the small sounds of bodies. A throat cleared. Leather creaked. A child's foot scraped stone. Her looks were her own. Grey eyes, narrow mouth, a cheekbone with a little stubbornness in its line. The head housekeeper's words rang in her. "Dwell in the corners, make yourself a hinge, not a door." She swallowed. In the upper gallery the priesthood watched like owls. The old law had never asked the castle slaves to stand on marble. It had asked for girls from good families, for daughters whose letters and lineage made tidy sense. But the wheat had failed twice in a decade. The king's council had a new definition of good. Brinna breathed like someone tasting summer. She smiled at the crowd, and then made a little show of lowering her eyes, as if modesty were a coin she could spend, and then get back. "I accept," she began. "Wait," the high priest said. He lifted a mirror from the velvet-lined box at his feet. Its silver rim was plain as a vow. As the law requires, the choice must face the mirror. Brinna turned to the mirror, lashes lowered. Her reflection rippled as wax dripped from a candle and sketched a pale vein through the air. In the glass, her beauty held, yet someone watching closely might have seen a shallow brightness in the eyes, like light on river scum. The priest's mouth tightened. He angled the mirror toward Mara. Mara had never seen herself in such clean metal. In the servants' quarters, surfaces were for work. Wood scarred by knives, buckets scuffed by boots, pots blackened with honest use. Here the mirror made an altar of her face. She flinched, then made herself look. Her eyes startled her. Not their color, no. Rather, the depth of them, the oldness, as if every night she had tucked a little more weather into them. Something in the glass seemed to approve. A quick darkening, like a door unlatched in a house you thought was empty. By the mirror, the priest murmured, the heart's hunger is shown. Brinna's smile trembled. This is absurd, she whispered to a guard, whose ears flamed because he had once kissed her fingers and she had laughed. The seneschal set the mirror aside. He lifted his staff again, and the wind clutched at the banners and made them bow. Mara of the lower kitchens, he said, do you accept what is asked? The whole hall leaned. The housekeeper's voice echoed, hinge not door. Then the memory of bread, a heel still warm, held out to a boy with ash in his hair and a fearful set to his shoulders. He had stammered, thank you, as if the word frightened him. This winter had been teeth, one had to be a mouthful of mercy where one could. Mara's heart made a hammer. I accept, she said, voice quiet, but firm enough to take a shape in the cold air. A sigh went through the hall, disbelief and relief braided. The seneschal's eyes flicked to Brinna. The law has chosen, he said. It isn't the law, Brinna said, and soft pretty fury cracked her voice. It's your little game. A pity, came another voice, dry as an old page. The voice belonged to a man in a travel-worn cloak, his hair black, his hands folded. The captain of the East Watch. People said he had seen the king below, back when he'd been a squire with too much faith. He did not look at Brinna. He looked at Mara, as one looks at a doorway that had not existed until a moment ago. The bells spoke again, thinner this time, as if farther away, though the tower had not moved. Mara felt the sound in her bones. The law had chosen. No, she had. I will see him, she said, surprising even herself with the verb, present and simple. See, not serve, see, not feed. The difference mattered in her mouth. You will go below, the priest coughed to cover his discomfort. We will test the bond at moonrise. There is time yet to prepare. Time, that was its own omen. The moon would be full tonight, ringed by a bruise-colored halo. An eclipse, the captain had told the seneschal in a low voice in the morning, voice carrying only far enough for those who needed to hear to hear. If the law were to be kept, it must be kept before shadows swallowed the light, or else the chains might turn to lilies and the king could walk, or else the chains would grow barbs. The stories disagreed. Mara descended with 2 guards and the captain. The steps into the underkeep were narrow, worn, cool as the inside of the mouth of a cave. The air shifted from spiced beeswax to damp stone, and something like old rain. She held the rail, palm damp. On the landing, a door waited with iron bands and a keyhole starved for its key. The captain drew the key from his cloak, and held it for a breath, his thumb brushing the teeth, as if remembering what they could open. This is a threshold, he said. You don't cross by mistake. I know what it is, Mara said. And she did. There were thresholds everywhere in a castle. Between heat and chill, above and below, wanted and used. She had been crossing them since she could lift a pail. He unlocked the door. Beyond, the corridor took the light and made it kneel. A single torch hissed, dropped resin like tears. The floor sloped. She had to check her feet each step. The captain walked at her shoulder. He will not touch you, he said quietly. Not without consent. That is part of the vow. And if I consent, Mara said, more to hear how the words sounded on her breath. His mouth tugged. Then the vow binds us all. They came to a chamber cut from the castle's root, its ceiling a shallow dome darkened by old smoke. Chains ran from 4 pillars to a shape in the center of the room. More candles than she'd ever seen gathered their small flames into a trembling ring. The shape lifted its head at the sound of their approach. The eyes were open long before the face was fully visible in the candlelight, and they struck her first like a chill. Not the red of stories, but a deep, old, grey storm colour, in which the candle ring made haggard moons. His mouth was unsmiling, yet not cruel. The chains had been designed by someone who loved craft too much. They lay on him like jewellery with a spite in it. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Mara of the Kitchens," the captain said. His voice did something it rarely did, a softening, a formality that was also a prayer. "This is King Valen. Immortal. Chained for 100 years. Kept below, so that above could go on." Stories pressed against her skull from the inside, wanting to be let out. Mara stepped forward until the torch's smoke threaded her hair. Valen inhaled lightly, eyes closing once as if the scent mattered. "You smell of yeast," he said, voice hoarse as parchment, "and wood smoke, and rain." "The kitchen's baked late," Mara said. "The dough didn't rise fast enough." A smile, the smallest thing, moved the corner of his mouth. "Common treason," he murmured. "Bread that refuses to be commanded." She should not have liked him, and perhaps she didn't. Like was not the word. But the room shifted with his voice. He didn't look at her mouth or the line of her throat, the way some men did when they tried to make you into a reply to a question they hadn't earned the right to ask. He looked at her eyes and stayed there, as if that were level ground. "We'll conduct the test at moonrise," the captain said. "For now." He produced a cup of glazed clay from his cloak and a small flask. "Salt broth," he said to Mara softly. "For strength. The law doesn't ask anyone to starve." That mercy, small and ordinary, cut deeper than the high talk upstairs. Mara took the cup in both hands. The warmth seeped, then settled. She looked at Valen. "May I share?" she asked the captain, then the priest in his absence, then the air itself, uncertain to whom such requests should be addressed here, where the law blurred. The captain inclined his head. "Ask him." Mara lifted the cup enough to catch Valen's gaze. "Do you want some?" For a heartbeat, something like surprise lived on his face, as if it had been hiding there and wasn't used to light. He nodded once. "Yes," he said, voice low. "Thank you." She stepped close enough for the chain to sigh. The links were not silver, not entirely. Some new alloy that did not burn or bless. She could smell him. Cold stone, and the ghost of cedar, and a bitter note like quinine. His mouth did not open like a door demanding its due. It opened as if thirst could be a shy thing. She tipped the cup. He drank, eyes never leaving hers. Heat traveled up her wrists. "A law that keeps a man like a dog," Mara said, voice flat, because if it were not flat it would be a cry, "and calls it safety." "A law that kept their children alive," Valen said without flinching, and the dark truth of it rang once in the chamber. "We do not need to lie about the cost to admit it was paid." She took a breath. "I am not good with lies," she said. A small sound at the door made them turn. Brinna stood on the threshold, hair like dusklight, face pale with anger and something else. A small bright greed that had nowhere to go. She had come down with one of the lesser priests, their feet whispering over the stones. "This cannot stand," she said to the captain, not looking at Mara as if not looking would make her invisible again. "She's nothing." The captain's mouth went hard. "We will test the bond as the law requires. You will leave now." Brinna's eyes flicked to the chain, to the king, to Mara holding the cup with both hands like a sacrament. "You should have chosen me," she said, voice almost breaking on the me because the hall had been a mirror, and in that mirror she had seen herself crowned by attention, and attention had always done what she asked. Mara didn't answer. The priest led Brinna back the way she had come. The keys rang softly. The sound clung to the air longer than it should have, like a promise with teeth. When the moon rose, it brought with it the memory of the sea. Though the castle sat in landlocked hills, the round of it throbbed in the well of the stair. The captain returned with the high priest and the seneschal, and 2 men who carried between them the mirror again. They set it where it could gather the candlelight, and cast it back at Valen and Mara, like a second, colder illumination. "This is the essence test," the priest said. He had the voice of a man who had rehearsed often while alone in cold rooms. "Stand here, Mara of the Kitchens, before the mirror. King Valen, raise your eyes. The mirror will show whether your hungers bind or break the law. Mara's breath smoked out as a slender plume. The chamber wasn't cold enough for that. The omen of it made a bead of sweat prick under her hair. She stepped into place. The mirror drank her face, and gave it back, with a little more clarity than she liked. Her eyes were not beautiful, they were used. She let her mouth steady itself, set the cup down. "I'm ready," she said. Valen, who had been sitting without slumping as if refusal to slump were a small private victory, raised his head. His gaze held hers through the mirror. There was a thread stretched between them now that hadn't been before, spun thin as silk, strong enough to hold a weight they hadn't measured yet. The priest began to speak the old words in a language that felt like clean bone in the mouth. As he spoke, the mirror clouded, then cleared. A lake at dawn. It showed Mara offering the cup. It showed her hands, and the small scars, and how she didn't hide them when she remembered not to. It showed, briefly, a boy with ash in his hair eating bread, and a soldier whose fever broke only after a square of cool cloth pressed to his neck. It showed Valen in a window long ago, hair unbound, rain blowing through, holding a lantern so that people below could run toward the light, instead of a dark that would have eaten them. It showed his mouth refusing to beg, refusing to command. It showed hunger, yes, hunger for breath, for sky, for unchained movement. But it showed another hunger braided with that one, to be looked at without fear, to be believed when he said what he would and would not do. "By the mirror," the priest said, voice not hoarse now, voice a little smaller than before. "The bond is true." Brenna's voice drifted from the stair where she had returned, hidden behind a pillar. "Then break the chain," she said too loudly, as if volume could make her part of this moment again. "If she has him, let him go. If the law binds them, it binds us." "Not yet," the captain said, eyes on the moon's edge. "There is still the eclipse. We cannot write the new vow, while the old shadow is not yet full." Time pressed. A train whistle would have been too modern. Instead, the castle's own iron bones sang with the change. The moon began to dim, the world making a shallow dish of the light. The priest lifted his hands. "In witness of the law," he said, "we ask, who speaks for the old and who speaks for the new?" The seneschal opened his mouth to speak for the old. Mara stepped forward before she could think if she had the right. "I speak for what comes next," she said. Silence is not an absence. It's the breath before a word. The captain inclined his head, faintly. Valen's eyes flamed once, not with red, with something like recognition. "On what grounds," the priest said, "do you claim to speak?" Mara lifted her chin. The words found her, as if they had been waiting in the servants' stairwells all these years. "I have counted the loaves and the bowls," she said. "I have seen who eats and who does not. I have given away my portion and been scolded and done it again. The law has lived in my hands. I know where it fails and where it holds. I speak for the new because I know what mercy costs. And I," Valen said, "speak for the bound, who have fed this land for a century with our breath and blood. I will not feed it further, without consent freely given and honored each time, not once." The mirror showed their faces close together. Mara's plainness a kind of sturdy grace, Valen's beauty the sorrowing kind that does not ask to be forgiven for existing. It showed Brenna's face too for a moment, a flash of her, not cruel, not kind, just a girl whose reflection had always done what she wished until tonight when it would not. The priest looked at his hands. He had expected to prove something else. He had expected the chain to spell order. Instead, it spelled hunger on both sides, and the alignment of those hungers. "Very well," he said, weary, honest. "Speak your vow." Mara glanced at Valen. "If we do this," she said, not whispering because whispers made things small, "you will not take from me without my say." "I will not take from you without your say," Valen said steady, "nor from any who share your bread." "And if I do not say," she asked, to make the claws sit up straight like a spine. "Then I do not take," he said simply. "I bleed out on this floor rather than break it." Heat rose in her throat. Consent could be a cold word. Here, it warmed the room. "And I," she said, "will witness you, not as monster, but as man who has been used to make men feel safe. I will watch and say what is true." I will not run when the old stories try to make me small. I will stand at the door and name what attempts to pass. Brynner made a small, involuntary noise. It sounded for once like pain, not performance. The captain placed his hand on the chain. Then by my office, he said. Let us prove it. He lifted the key from the ring at his belt, a second key, older, made by a smith who had hammered his grief into the iron and left it there to sing. He fit it into the first lock. The chain rattled as if it had been sleeping and didn't want to wake. He turned the key. The first lock opened with a noise like old breath leaving a chest. The second opened, then the third. The fourth refused, the key biting and slipping. The eclipse deepened. The room tilted toward shadow. The priest murmured something to his god, and got only the sound of his own breath for answer. Mara, Valen said. His voice thinned, then steadied. Do not force it, if it will not. Let me, she said softly, reaching. She touched the chain where the last lock clung. The metal was colder than the water in the cistern, colder than any morning's first touch of air. She pressed her palm flat against it. I am not yours, she said, and I choose you. It was a strange sentence, hard and true. The lock heard it. It loosened as if some stubborn hinge in it had imagined itself a jaw, and finally decided to stop clenching. The last link fell. Valen did not lunge. He did not rise like a storm. He stood with care, each motion deliberate, as if this were a ritual in which order mattered. His chains hissed on the stone. He put his hands out, wrists bare, and did not touch her until he said, May I? Mara nodded. Yes. His fingers closed around hers, light as a promise. Warmth moved from him into her and back, a small exchange that could have become something else if either of them had let it. They didn't. Above, the bells tried to ring and failed. The moon went entirely dark. For a breath there was no light but the candles and the mirror's thin offering. Then the shadow began to pass, reluctant as any old habit that had kept people alive. When the first smear of light returned, someone in the gallery wept once, and then strangled it back into a cough. Brynner stepped forward from her pillar, face set. What of me, she asked, not to the room but to the idea of fairness or fate. What am I meant to be if not the chosen? Yourself, the captain said, not unkindly. Which is harder? She flinched as if struck. Her eyes went to Valen, to Mara, and something in her faltered, not rage, but the tight fist that had been it. I brought you a comb once, she said to Mara suddenly, as if she needed to remember kindness to keep from turning to salt. When you cut your hair with a knife, and it went blunt, she laughed in a small, ugly way. I wanted you to use it so you would owe me. Mara surprised herself by smiling. I used it, she said, but I didn't owe you. That's not how combs work. Brynner swallowed. What should I do now? Go have soup, Mara said. It sounded ridiculous and holy at once. And bring a bowl to the boy with ash in his hair in the scullery. Sit with him while he eats. Don't look at yourself while you do. Brynner blinked. Then something in her loosened, a single knot in a net. All right, she said, in a tone she had never used before, an unadorned one. She stepped backward from the threshold. She turned at the stair and looked back once, not at Valen, not at the chain on the floor, but at Mara. And the look was a vow she never spoke out loud. To try. Days formed their own shape. People looked at Mara differently in the halls, as if she had been given new bones in place of old ones. She wore the same grey. Her hair grew the same way hair did when no one told it to be something else. Yet she crossed thresholds now with a readiness that had not been a part of her walk before. Valen took to the margins of the castle by night, not as a shadow to frighten children, but as a man with a debt to keep, and a promise not to spend it. He learned the geometry of the new vow. He asked. She answered. Sometimes she said no. He did not break. The castle learned too. The priest's sermons grew stranger and more honest. The seneschal found himself, ridiculous, ancient man, carrying loaves now and then, when nobody else's hands were empty enough. The law had demanded a trial. The new vow required one more. It came 3 weeks after the eclipse, when the old families sent messengers up the mountain. Their words were razor dry. We require proof, they said, that our safety still holds. Bring the mirror to the east gate. Bring the bound king and the girl. We will test if what you chose was not madness in silk. The captain met Mara in the courtyard where wind combed the ivy backwards. "You don't have to go," he said. "The law is satisfied within our walls." "The law that made a dog of a man and a hinge of a girl," Mara said, not with anger, just accounting. She wrapped a cloak around her shoulders, plain brown, warm in the good way warmth is earned. "We go." The road to the east gate ran along a cliff face where swifts had nested before any banner flew. Valen walked with his hands inside his sleeves, the habit of someone who had been bound long enough that the nerves at his wrists remembered. The mirror had been strapped to a litter, and carried by two of the castle's younger men, with the nervousness of men transporting a god. At the gate the old families, representatives waited, faces hiding in cowls though the day was not cold. Their leader pulled back his hood to show a thin face with a scribe's mouth. "Stand," he said. "Face the mirror." The words were careful. He knew, or thought he did, magic shouldn't be offended. If he is what you say and she is what you claim, the glass will not crack. If you have broken the law and let hunger write your ethics, we walk. Mara stood. Valen stood with her. The cliff wind lifted their hair in the same handful. The mirror waited. The men lit candles on either side, so the silver would have light to drink and give back. "Do you trust me?" Valen asked, not in a possessive lower voice, not in a performative upper voice, just a question. He had learned the cadence of them. "Yes," she said. She had learned that too. The mirror clouded. It cleared. It showed not the chains, not the eclipse, not even the cup, though the cup was there and the story of both their hands. It showed the small room where Mara slept, the narrow pallet, the wool blanket. It showed Valen standing in the doorway but not stepping through until she said, "Come in." It showed him sitting on the floor rather than the bed by choice, because his body still believed that closeness meant debt. It showed her sitting on the floor with him to make it not a thing about ranks. It showed them talking over a bowl of soup, the stupid sweetness of carrots, the honest salt of the bone, that she had brought him, because even immortals grew hollow if not fed. It showed the way his eyes warmed when she laughed at something truly foolish, and the way her eyes warmed when he did the same. Then it showed the east gate as it was. Men ready to be disappointed, to be right, to be rid of the burden of a story that asked them to grow. The mirror did not crack. Instead, faint and absurd, as if even silver could be sentimental, it fogged in the shape of two mouths breathing in winter. The leader of the old families hissed. "Parlor trick," he said, then louder, for himself as much as the others, "Parlor trick." The cliff wind took his words and gave them back thinner, like the bells had before. "You came for proof," the captain said, voice not cruel, merely tired. "You were offered it. Refusing what you asked for is not a failure of the giver." One of the men with him, younger, clean-shaven too close so that his skin shone, put a hand out toward the mirror. "I saw my mother in one, when I was a boy," he said softly. "My real mother. The one who died before I could have her. I don't know if it was a trick or a love, but it kept me alive one winter. We should not break it." "Enough," the leader snapped. Yet his shoulders trembled. He had known hunger too. He turned away with a swirl of his cloak, as if fabric could be the last word. "We will watch," he said, which was the compromise of a man who did not like to learn in public. They walked back to the castle. The sky was a long tarnish. The wind had a smell in it like wet iron, which told Mara rain would come in the night, and the roofs would creak. She let herself feel tired, now that the test had passed. Valen moved closer, not touching, but close enough to make warmth by mere nearness. "Do you regret?" he asked, as if he were asking himself too. "Do you?" she returned. He considered. "I regret that I did not know bread could smell like that when shared, rather than stolen by law," he said. "I regret the years I was a blade rather than a key." "I regret," she said, "that I learned corners so well I thought they were rooms." They reached the kitchen door. The one with the old stain nobody could scrub out. The one that stuck in damp weather unless you leaned into it with your hip. Mara put her palm on the wood. She said, out loud, because sometimes thresholds needed to hear you, "We are not opening this to anything we have not named." Valen waited. She felt for the hinge that always caught. She pushed. The door yielded like someone forgiving themselves for something small and long ago. Inside, the kitchen breathed warmth. Bread cooled on racks. The housekeeper, who had always been kinder in action than in tone, waved them to the long table and pretended she didn't. Brinna stood there with sleeves rolled, hair braided back without ribbons, laughing at something the boy with ash in his hair had said. The laugh was new, messy, unarranged. When she saw Valen, she did not flinch. When she saw Mara, her face, lit in a way that was not worship, not envy, but a heart recognizing where it had been witnessed and held to a better shape. "There's soup," she said, as if soup were a ceremony, which perhaps it was. Mara ladled broth into 2 bowls. She set one before Valen and one before herself. He watched her hands the way a man watches a door he is about to walk through, not as a thief, as someone invited. "May I?" he asked, fingers hovering above the steam as if it were a holy thing. The broth smelled of marrow, bay leaf and thyme. "Yes," she said, and the word did not feel like surrender, it felt like writing. They ate. The captain came in and stole the end of a loaf and pretended he had not. The priest leaned against a pillar, as if he had walked too far too fast, and didn't want anyone to notice. The seneschal sat in a chair as if he did not remember how one's knees bent when not on ceremony. The housekeeper flicked the backs of knuckles lightly, when elbows got too greedy near the salt. Mara felt the ordinary mercy of soup move through her body, and settle where fear had lived. Valen closed his eyes on a mouthful as if memory had flavor. He opened them and met her gaze, and something old and hungry and something new and careful wove together, and did not strangle either. Outside, rain began. It tapped the eaves in a soft code. The doors of the castle stayed shut against the weather, open to the lives within. The mirror in the underkeep dimmed of its own accord, satisfied perhaps or bored. Later, when the candles had guttered to soft gold moons, and the kitchen had emptied of everyone but the house's patient mice, and a tired girl and a not-king learning how to be a man again, Mara stood. She carried the bowls to the washing pail, rolled up her sleeves, and hissed a little when hot water met old scars. Valen stood too, easing the memory of chain from his wrists. He did not step toward her. He waited until she looked at him. "May I help?" he asked. "You may," she said. Their hands met beneath the water. The heat wrote itself into their bones. Soap made the surface squeak until she eased. He rinsed and set the bowls to dry. He moved like someone discovering that action did not require an audience to be holy. "Mara," he said, at last. He spoke her name like a threshold he intended to honor every time he crossed it. "I would like to kiss you." She felt it low, then high, then everywhere breath lives. She thought of mirrors that told truths without cruelty, of doors that opened because you asked them properly, of soup that was a sacrament, because of whose hands had turned raw things edible. She thought of the law and the chain. She thought of the vow they had made not as theater, but as the spine of a new kind of story. "Yes," she said, plain as bread. He kissed her as if mouths could be grateful. When he drew back, the air between them stayed warm. The rain ticked on, counting something down and something up. The night made a wide, honest room around them. In the weeks that followed, people began to bring their small vows to the kitchen instead of the chapel. A promise to share the last apple. A promise to ask before touching. A promise to break no one's back with a rule meant to protect. The old law did not vanish in a flare. It thinned, then re-knit into something you could breathe through. The chains were melted down to keys and bells. The bells tolled at births, and at the start of harvest. The keys opened storerooms where people had been keeping fear like grain against a winter that never came the way they'd imagined. On an early morning, when mist lay like lamb's wool in the orchard, and crows discussed theology on the wall, Mara knelt by the threshold to the underkeep, and placed her palm on the stone. "Thank you," she said to the door that had not always been kind, but had been, at last, fair. Then she stood and went to the kitchen, where Valen was already cutting bread, his hair tucked behind one ear, because he had learned you could do that, because nobody had told him he must not. Brinna ladled soup. The boy with ash in his hair laughed with soup on his chin, and no one told him not to, because there are times when the gods prefer such noises to prayers. Some days the world still pressed as if time were a belt tightened one notch too far, the harvest late, the well rope frayed, the messenger bringing news that wanted too much blood. But when pressure came, it found a room where mercy had been made ordinary. It found doors that asked you to name yourself before passing, mirrors that showed hunger without shame. It found love, not grand and loud with flags, but standing at the hearth and offering a bowl. In the hall upstairs, the banners breathed. The wind rattled the arrow slits, and the candles burned down toward their collars. The castle kept its old bones, and learned a softer way to carry them. Love did not end the hunger in the world, it bridged it. It called people across, one by one, and did not charge a toll. When the next eclipse came, years later, fewer men kept watch on the chainless chamber because watchfulness had changed its object. Mara and Valen stood by the east wall, old rock at their backs, soup cooling on the parapet between their elbows. The earth did its ancient trick. The moon slid into shadow. The air tasted of iron and rain. Valen leaned to her. "Do you want to go below?" he asked, meaning, "Do you want to honor where we began?" "I want to stand here," she said, "and let the shadow pass us like a story we survived." He nodded. They ate their soup. The bells tried and succeeded. The crows muttered. And then, as if commanded by no one and everyone, rose in a black laughter that crossed the valley and settled again. Later, when the night was full of what endings always are, beginnings with different light, they went down to the kitchen and cut a heel of bread and shared it. Love was not a crown, not a fetish, not a performance in a hall. It was a threshold crossed and crossed again, because both of them kept saying yes, and because sometimes one of them said no, and the other held still, and waited for yes to be true. Mara washed the bowls, Valen dried them, rain came and stopped, the mirror slept. The doors did not mind if you were a hinge sometimes, so long as someone else held the weight with you. And when the castle breathed, it smelled like yeast, and damp stone, and the faint sweetness of things that had taken their own time to rise, and then did.